Welcome to episode 16 of the Speed Secrets podcast, the first with two guests, James McMahon and Davin Sturdivant of Kart Pulse. If you've thought about karting to tune up your car driving, if you currently race karts, or you just want to have a huge amount of fun for relatively little money, listen up as we talk about where karts fit into the performance and race driver's world.
Welcome to the Speed Secrets podcast. Join Ross Bentley and guests, drivers, instructors and coaches, engineers, officials, and others for conversations about high performance and race driving. Listen for tips and advice, thought-provoking ideas, and inspiration to take your own driving to the next level. Green, green, green!
Hi everyone, welcome to the show. Today's guest is, our James McMahon and Davin Sturdivant. Hey guys, you're my first double. You're the first time I've ever had. I've had two people on the show at one time. How do you feel about that?
I feel great about it. How about you?
It's the best birthday ever, so I'm happy.
This is true. Davin is 21. Wait, no.
Your face. 30th birthday. I worked with you for how long, right?
You're so old. What are you going to do?
I have no idea now. I think it's supposed to life starts or stops at 30. I don't know. I don't know anymore.
Well, happy birthday, Davin. That's cool. Hey, is there a better way to spend your time than talking about driving and cars and karting and?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I got excited. I was like, I'm doing it. It's my birthday. I get to do what I want.
Yeah. So kind of introduce you guys. I mean, you guys run Kart Pulse, which is kind of a community for the karting world, and I'll let you guys explain that.
Sure. I originally started Kart Pulse back in 2013, just to kind of fill a big space, a big glut in kart racing, in that there really wasn't a resource to go to learn more about it. In a counterintuitive way, for as accessible as the sport is, there wasn't any one place to go where you could even just find out where tracks are or when events are on. And we also had some changes in our community. For lack of a better description, one of the major websites had a big update, and they kind of nuked their forums in the process. And that, frankly, damaged our community. So I wanted to rebuild our community as well. And so I started working on that. I also started a Facebook page just to kind of test different kinds of content and the angle that I was coming from, which was not so much the stepping stone of kart racing, but just kart racing for racing's sake, because it's fun, because it's satisfying. And then Davin, I've always kind of seen his content that he's written inside and outside of karting. And there was a TV series called Kart Life, if I remember correctly. And it was, what's the word? Horrible. It was.
Don't hold back. Tell us what you really think of it.
Yeah, I mean, it just highlighted the worst in kart, not even just in kart racing, but what was really terrible about it was that even just some of the individuals that were in there that I know would otherwise not subscribe to the kind of the mentality that was portrayed on the show. It just really made kart racing look. It was reality TV, so their modus operandi is to get people to watch and get engaged and get upset. So anyway, Davin had done a video with a friend of his, and we'll have Davin talk about this, but it was basically called The Values of Kart Racing, and it just nailed what a lot of us in kart racing felt but hadn't been able to articulate as to why we race or why we kart. And that video is. That was basically the reason I reached out to Davin on top of his content. Like, in short, you seem to get it, and you're pretty objective. You're not kind of getting too taken in by some of the hype trains that go on within any sport, but especially in kart racing. And so let's work together on something and see what we can come up with. And that was 2015, I think.
Yeah,
that sound right?
2015. That's about right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I met James, like you said, kind of through that video. I had been karting for just a little bit, but it had happened to be I was helping a friend of mine on a college project. And so it was for his college cinematography class, and he had to take a topic of, it was about passion. It was about finding people who were passionate about something. And his father is actually in car racing. doing auto racing. So he went around with a lot of his buddies and tried to find somebody who would be the subject for his video, and nobody was particularly that interested. I, on the other hand, had been writing some articles and doing some pieces for, like driver coaching and indoor karting and a few other things. And he came to me and said, would you be interested in being in this film? And I said, I can help you out, and free content's free content, so I might as well help you out. So he came with me to the kart track, and we put together some stuff, and he interviewed me, and my whole aim had been, let's make this easy to understand, and let's explain that karting should be fun, and let's explain that the people in it are fun, and to get people wanting to be interested in doing this sport, not just talk about like, oh, I'm Davin, I think I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread or whatnot, because nobody is, and that's not interesting, right? It's more about the community and all the types of people, like in motor racing in general. So that's kind of what kicked all that off, and then ran into James and started working with him.
I mean, I think it's you bring up a point, James, is that it almost seems like karting is seen in one of two ways. Either, it's a stepping stone because all these Formula One drivers started in karting at some point in their career. So karting is seen as a way to get somewhere else, or it's a destination in itself, right? There's nothing wrong with karting for the rest of your life, right?
Right. And I think our stance also, too, is, more recently, and this is more Davin's idea that he kind of brought to me, but that is karting is also something that can augment your other programs because it's relatively inexpensive. It's a great way to get track time and practice good habits, with lots of, comparatively speaking, lots of places to do it, and in some cases you can go and drive as many laps as you can for $45 at a track. So if you're somebody who's already involved in car racing, you have this other opportunity to augment what you're already doing. So I think we'd expand on that, but definitely there's a lot of the stepping stone thing, and because it's the kind of shiny object, and ironically enough, that's how I came into the sport. I was 12, 13 years old, and I saw Senna and Prost battle at Bercy. I don't know if you've seen that footage, but it was an indoor kart track that they built for all the F1 guys in Paris. Mm-hmm. And Senna and Prost were just going out of hammer and tongs, which is funny. They were battling for second and third. I think Cesaris was actually leading and pulling away at that. But just seeing that and the speed and the competition and the excitement of it, I'd heard of something called kart racing, but I had no idea what it was up until that point. But once I saw that was it. I'm like, this is what I want to do. And I was about 13 when I saw that, and I did a little bit of indoor stuff when I was 14. And then when I was 15 or 16, I lied about my age to a local bar so I could get a job. And I think I was paid like £2. I'm originally from Ireland. I was paid like £2.50 an hour. Saved up £750 to buy a go-kart and went racing finally in '97. And it was a disaster because I didn't have the knowledge that I needed to really prepare the kart and understand it. But I had a great time doing it and some great memories, and some of the relationships that I built between now and then. I mean, my best friends have been at their weddings. They're nearly all from kart racing, and so that's kind of it's been with me for a long time. I've dabbled with some car stuff too, but I've always gravitated back towards karting for some reason.
Well, I think I was having this conversation just recently with somebody else, and the whole thing of a friend of mine said, you should always compete where you have the biggest budget. And in car racing, as you know, I mean, it's pretty tough to go car racing and have the biggest budget because somebody's always going to have a bigger one than you. But in karting, it's hey, all things relative. Karting's relatively inexpensive. It still can cost you a lot, but it is possible to go and race in a class where you got the biggest budget in town.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And even when karting gets quote unquote expensive, usually what I say is that it's great value. For example, you could maybe race at the Supernats, which is an event that's held in Las Vegas each year. If you really want to do that, you'd probably spend $15,000 or more, which sounds like a huge amount of money for a go-kart race. But on the other hand, you're racing something that's offering Formula Car performance against Alex Rossi and Nico Rosberg and these other guys. So yes, it's a lot of money, but it's a lot of fun for $15,000. If you've got that money. I don't.
Yeah.
But that's what I love about kart racing, is that you can, at your local level, you could feasibly pick up what's called a Briggs 206 kart, probably as cheaply as $1,800, used in reasonably good condition, and go and just drive the wheels off it. And then on the other end, you have the shifted karts, which are Formula Car level performance and a totally different beast. But you have that dynamicism and that those choices. Unfortunately, a lot of the emphasis tends to be on the more expensive part. And sometimes you'll see folks say, well, you can go shifter racing for an entire year for 60 grand. That's almost as expensive as, such and such Formula Car or such and such sedan. And the comparisons don't always line up in terms of performance and competition. But
right. 1-to-1, yeah.
Yeah, but it's like anything. I feel like the saturation point in terms of how much money you can spend in kart racing is definitely quite low, but the perception of how much money you spend, of course, is very high. Just like anywhere in auto racing, people see somebody spending a lot of money and they attribute their success to money, not to commitment, not to all these other factors.
Right.
The shiny object.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it comes down to how you spend your budget that really makes a difference. And, I think one of the things that was interesting you were saying earlier, James, is, watching the Senna Prost thing and karting and kind of getting hooked on that and then going and getting your kart, but not really knowing what you're doing. I guess that's kind of what you guys are doing, right? The great thing about the past few decades is getting access to information has gotten a whole lot easier. And if there's good sources for information out there, it makes it a whole lot easier for somebody to get involved with the sport and not make some of the same mistakes that you and I and some other people made, right?
Well, I mean, that's kind of where I came from. I came from the club racing side when I was in my early 20s. So, I didn't have a racing background or a racing family where I started at 9 or 10. And I went through all of high school going, racing's cool, but I can never afford it. And then when I was 19, a friend of mine took me to an autocross for the first time, and I did that for a couple of years. And it was awesome. I've had a lot of fun doing it. I made a lot of good friends. But the really good autocrossers were 35 and 40, and I was 20, and I didn't want to wait 15 years to be faster. So a buddy of mine said, you should come karting. And at first I was like, no, that's silly. I didn't know much about it. So I was just like, that's just for children, whatever. And he's like, well, you can't even talk smack about it until you at least go do it once. And I was like, okay, you're right. That's fine. And I jumped in an indoor kart at a local track nearby, and I had so much fun. I did 4 races a day for 30 days straight. It was ridiculous. I was the guy that was there all the time.
And Davin, that's where you and I first met, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it was by accident when that happened, because I didn't know I was standing next to you. And then we were doing our sessions, and then you left, and someone's like, do you know who that is? And I'm like, no, that's Ross Bentley. Oh,
and that's when you said, who? What?
Right? No, I read your books. I knew a lot about you, right? And I had talked to a lot of my friends about your, a lot of your writing and a bunch of other stuff. Just you need to read this. This is awesome. But then all of a sudden, it's like standing next to the star at the rock concert, right? You have no idea that you're standing next to Kiss. You're like, oh, great, awesome. Thanks, I gotta go. But kind of leading back to what we were talking about, the knowledge thing, the part that I struggled about when I got into competition karting was that I couldn't find any solid standard places to help me get from A to B. How do I understand if a tire is working well? What's good chassis setup? How do I set my seat? I could go through some forums and kind of piecemeal some things together, which was somewhat helpful, but there was never any real standard place I could just read something and give myself a good standard to kind of move out from. So I actually started writing on my own blog just what I was learning as I went, and said, well, at least I'll write down what I've learned and then share that with people, and then somebody can correct me as we go, and then I'll just edit. And then as I ran into James, we found that there was a bigger need for it, and it kind of evolved into Kartpulse after that.
And it's so cool when you write something, right? Because it clarifies your thinking. That's the only reason I write, by the way. It's just because I'm so stupid I need to figure things out, and when I write it down, I figure it out that way. So
I'm the same way. I forget things all the time. And so then all of a sudden I have podcasts and videos and articles just so that I just remember what I learned that day. And I just got, I got fortunate. I guess I was fortunate. I was in a space where there were other people that thought like I did. And so I would get emails back going, could you write a little bit more about this? Or I didn't even know you could do this thing. Or I think the exact opposite from you, and this is why. And that's always really helpful. Like, that community engagement is what helps us learn, especially in the demographic that, I'm in and maybe James is in that 21 to 25 and up category, where it can be hard to find people who are willing to admit that they don't know anything, versus like when you're 9, when you just don't know anything.
Right.
So.
And James, you talked about the relationships, and I think, Davin, that was the thing. I mean, you and I bump into each other at this indoor karting thing, and I'm trying to remember back, didn't we, like, somehow we were at some endurance karting thing, and we ended up on the same team, actually.
We did. Actually, what ended up happening was that we were at the Alfa Romeo Endurance event at an indoor track a while ago. And because now that I knew that you were there, I actually coerced my teammates to let me go out at the same time that you went out. So I kept moving my stint around to line up with yours. And so I was like, where's Ross? Nope. I'm going to go now. Nope. Okay, I'm going now.
Yeah.
And the way we ended up meeting actually was that some guy tried to run you into the wall, and I was behind you. And I was like, you can't run Ross Bentley into the wall. I need to talk to him. And so I nudged you forward so that he hit both of our carts. And so it kind of like zeroed out and just kept pushing you up the straightaway until we got away.
Oh, brilliant. And I guess I never thanked you back then, but I'm thanking you now. So
No worries. I will remember that story because I remember the guy in the red helmet. He was one of, like, quote unquote, those karters that was pushing everybody out of the way. And you and I were on the lead lap. And I was like, you can't wreck him before I get a chance to talk to him. I'll never get a chance to talk to him. You got to go.
Well, and I think, that's the cool thing about the sport, right? Is, we meet people and we connect with people, and, you think about all the friends that you make in this sport. And when I say this sport, I mean, it could be karting, it could be autocross, it could be
totally
track day stuff, it could be pro racing. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but it's all those relationships that are just so cool. So.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of my friends, have crossed over and back. And, I went from autocross to karting, and a lot of my autocross friends are like, come back, come hang out with us. And then the inverse will be true. I'm like, come drive my 206 or come drive my tag. Right. So then that way we can kind of share what we've learned in other places. And that's always been really fun. So
I want to ask, both of you about that is I've coached a lot of young drivers who have come from karting, and, they looked at karting as that stepping stone thing, and they're on their way to Formula One. They need to be in a Formula One contract by tomorrow afternoon, kind of thing. And
me too.
Yeah, me too. Just the contract. I just want the paycheck.
Right.
I don't want to have to do all the hard work, but no. I think one of the so I've seen the techniques, the skills, the habits that somebody coming out of karting has, that then they get into cars, and there's obviously way more similarities than there are differences, but there are some differences. And I guess I'm curious, making that transition from autocross to karting, back to autocross, other things you've done, what have you struggled with?
So when I went from autocross to karting, I think the biggest thing I struggled with was working with other cars. Because in autocross, that's not a factor, and in karts it was.
Right.
So to be able to get used to anticipating all that traffic and getting used to kind of and moving all this, that's where indoor karting helped. Because I got to see a bunch of crazy things, and so then when I went to competition karting, it all seemed rather tame by comparison. We were just going faster.
Right.
So that was helpful. But I think that what can hurt the other way is when I go back to autocross, for example, is slowing my hands back down. Because a car does not want the same aggressive action that time. Like, it's still smooth, but a kart can be very immediate. It turns in when you turn in.
Yeah.
And in a car, depending on the suspension you have and the type of car and the type of surface, there can be a lot of waiting and a lot of holding and turning into for a corner and holding it before the car makes a set. And that transition can be difficult. If I just, for example, jumped from my tag right into another car, that takes me a minute to be like, it'll actually make the turn. It takes a little longer to stop. It takes a little longer to go.
So, what's interesting in you saying that is, so I've seen the same thing. Karters they get into cars and their hands are too quick. It's like, slow your hands down. I see a lot of autocrossers come into road racing or track day events, and they got to slow their hands down. So, karters had the fastest hands, autocrossers had the second fastest hands.
Right.
Guys that drive on racetracks need a slower set of hands, right? So it's all kind of real. I guess if you're drag racing, you probably got the slowest hands, maybe.
Right. Well, yeah. I guess you're still
except
making
when you're in real trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's funny. It's funny you say that because, like, even when I was working with indoor karters and some competition karters, we could always explain that, fast, slow, and smooth were different variables. And so, I know a lot of people who have very fast hands that are also very smooth inputs, and equally very slow hands that were very smooth inputs.
Right.
And
Fast but accurate.
Right. Fast but accurate. And I think that was the biggest challenge to kind of put two and two together with karters and, let's say, autocrossers and road racers, is that it's not that you're being any like slower with the input as you are just being deliberate and not just kind of throwing the car in and just trying to guess for it. Same with the kart. You're not trying to throw the kart in and guess. You're trying to deliberately put it at that apex and deliberately put it at the next one.
Right.
I think for me, braking was probably the biggest difference. Obviously you got to brake a lot sooner, but how you come off the brakes, there's a much wider in a car. There's a much wider envelope that you can vary, I feel. Whereas in a kart, even with front brakes, it's pretty much on and off. There's not as much nuance to it. You can trail brake a little bit sometimes, but not to the same extent that you can with a car. And of course, you got to brake a lot sooner. And if you got a heavy car, you kind of get the nose to settle and then really get down on it. Whereas with a kart, you can just pound it and come right off it again and then turn in. That cars don't take kindly to that. Tires certainly don't take kindly to it.
It's that suspension compression in a car that you don't notice that happens so quickly in a kart. Right? Like in a car, if you release off the brakes too quickly, you can kind of, a friend of mine calls it kind of pissing off the platform, where the front end just kind of lifts up and the car just won't turn, and because you've released the brakes too quickly. Where it'll happen in a kart, but in a kart also, because the tires are really your only suspension, you have a lot more. It's just a lot quicker. It's just boom boom. Right? And so you're still timing that release point, but just when you get off the brakes, you're pretty much done.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And James, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about again, the karters that I've coached who have moved into particularly open wheel cars. They are really, really, really good with that brake release. So once they kind of start to understand it, and I think it is, like you said, there's such a small window there of trailing, of releasing. It's very short. It's very, I hate to use the word abrupt, but it's almost abrupt. But good karters still use that last little tiny bit. So the sensitivity they've got is just so fantastic. They get into cars and they go, oh, well, it's kind of, now it's gotten easier. And so I think a great point is, just almost exaggerates that sensitivity.
Yeah. Yeah. I think,
for sure.
I think, though, the one thing I do notice when I talk to car racers that move into karts, when they start dealing with braking, the two things they kind of struggle with, and I still struggle with it from time to time, is that the kart can brake a lot deeper than you think. And so they'll go into a corner in a go-kart with car logic and brake really far away from the apex, and the kart will basically just come to a crawl as it gets to the apex, and you can go a lot deeper.
And accelerate to the corner.
And accelerate to the corner, exactly. And so that's one thing, is that braking in a kart, the performance there is so high that I think that's one thing that you notice. And I think then the other thing that ends up happening is the other side of the equation, when now that they know they have these amazing brakes, they almost overwhelm themselves. Like, I'm just going to go in there and slam on the brakes, and a lot, even with just rear brake only karts, they'll lock the rears up and send the thing backwards, or end up just going straight on, because they haven't yet found that scaled nuance of braking zone within the kart yet, and so that does take a bit of time.
So
there's that teeny window where you get off the brakes and you could begin your turn in, where you're already braking pretty hard with rear only brakes, and if you turn in or begin your turn in or even hit a bump the wrong way, at that point you're at very best sideways and maybe a little bit worse off.
So I mean, based on what I just heard, I could make the argument of, well, hey, I'm a car driver, I shouldn't go and practice in a kart because it's going to be teaching me all these things that I don't use in a car. How do you respond to that?
Well, I tend to look at it as it's more of a way to practice your observation skills, more so to speak, like the process of observing your driving and your inputs and the results, and coming to the track with a plan of what you want to test, whether it's chassis or driving or whatever. And even still, like as you said, it will seems to at least sharpen your sensitivity in those areas. But I think that's a fair point that comes up a lot. And really, the way I look at it is my mentality is, again, it's more about developing that approach of, the how you find time as you go around the track or find consistency. And, all the fundamentals still apply of making your marks, hitting your marks rather, every time, looking ahead as far as you can. And then if you're involved in competition, then you've got racecraft. I mean, if you look at some of the races at Newcastle Motorsports Park in Indiana, they've got kart grids of like 40, 45 karts. So you'll definitely get your racecraft work out there. But I think that's really the best way to approach it, or to approach any endeavor, I guess, in auto racing. I sometimes even think of sim racing, where the argument will be made that you can't learn anything about tuning a car from sim racing because it's not quite the same. But my interpretation or approach to that is that it's not about the specific values and changes that you're making. It's about it's about your process of your plan, the changes that you made, the outcome that you've observed, and iterating on that to improve your performance. That's my 2 cents.
One change, see if it works.
Yes. What you just said, 1,000 times over. I agree. I mean, it's the learning how to go quicker, right? And you're right. I mean, it doesn't have to be the exact technique. It's kind of going, well, what if I do this? What happens? And
right.
And I think, I tell drivers all the time, well, in the off season, go indoor karting. And they're like, oh, indoor karting. I mean, that's, yeah, in air quotes, I'm doing the kid stuff kind of stuff. And no, I mean, there's just so much to learn about figuring out, what do I do? If I change this line, if I change the way I turn the wheel, if I, do something here, and what happens? I think it's just so valuable. And yeah, I mean, you're just learn how to go fast. And of course, there is the racecraft. And what I've learned tonight about racecraft is make sure you've got some really fast young kid behind you who wants to hang out with you and will give you a little push on the straightaway. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, kind of to that point too, is I always position it as there's a huge psychological aspect to karting, whether it's indoor or outdoor, that a lot of racers can take the opportunity to refine because they're getting more seat time. I mean, I've talked to a lot of guys, and myself included, that, I still get worked up sometimes before an indoor race because I'm just ready to go racing. Yeah. And there are those little mental cues and mental ticks that it doesn't matter whether I'm in an indoor kart or my outdoor kart or on a sim or in a car, that if I don't have that programming in place, my driving's not as good as it should be.
Right.
Whether it's getting myself in the right frame of mind or giving myself some perspective if I'm getting outrun by somebody, or if I'm getting caught up by somebody, or if I'm catching somebody, just being in a kart helps to give me more opportunities to practice those things. So I'm not in my Club Racer Miata only 5 times a year and only practicing my racecraft 5 times a year. I'm in a kart maybe 50 times a year. And so I can really, I can write down in my logbook, what? I get worked up when I qualify in the middle, or I get worked up when someone's catching me, or I need to give myself a trigger when someone's catching me to turn my brain off. Let them drive to me. I won't drive to them. Like things like that, so that when I get back into whatever my main discipline is, I'm more prepared. And that's what I've always argued. My friends have said, well, I don't want to buy a kart because I don't want to spend all the money to buy a shifter kart. Well, then don't buy a shifter. Buy a 4-stroke, drive that all day. There are 25 people who will show up at PGP and race you all day, and you'll get just as much or more seat time in the 1 month than you will in a whole season in your Miata. And then when you do get into your Miata, you're a whole quote-unquote season up on everyone else who didn't go racing. So I don't know why you're not doing that.
And it just sharpens. I mean, anybody that's taken some time off and gone back and gotten into a car. And again, this doesn't matter whether they're club racing, pro racing, track day stuff, whatever, autocross, whatever. If you've been out of the car for a while, you get back in and you just don't have that precision. You find yourself missing things by a few inches or feet or more kind of thing. And if you just spend time in a kart, I mean, hey, how much does it cost to go to an indoor karting place once a week? Every week of the year.
$35, something like that.
If that.
Right.
If you compare that to how much, that's it's going to add up to, a couple of track days, throughout the entire year, and it's going to make all the rest of the track days you do just 10 times better. So,
right. And on the subject of indoor karting, I mean, traditionally that is, unfortunately, often looked down on by quote-unquote pro karters who have their own karts and so forth. And our approach and philosophy is, that's kind of silly. And the thing about indoor karting I think is interesting is that, even though your top speed rarely exceeds like 30 miles an hour, the rate at which the turns come towards you, your thought processing requirement is still, it's intense.
Yeah.
Even though numerically you're going at a slow speed, it's very intense. You're in and out through a turn really quickly. So like you say, you've got to have not just hit your marks, but your the curve, if you like, of your steering input and all your other inputs has to be right on point. Often when I go indoor kart racing and I'm racing against the guys who are there frequently, I get my ass handed to me. It's embarrassing. Like, it's bad. And I'm regard myself as a pretty mediocre driver, but it's funny. Like, there's some super competitive indoor kart racing that a lot of people would not. What's up?
Oh, my hand's up just talking about that. Like, I told you about the 30 days in a row where I did 4 races in a row, where I spent like 3,500 races before someone pulled me into an outdoor kart, like doing leagues and running up against people from all over, like pro racing drivers, club racers, people. All they did was indoor kart, and I learned more probably in that period just pounding around laps at that one track than I almost anywhere else, just because the playing field was kind of even. Right, and so everybody had the same machinery. Some karts didn't turn, some did. Right, you had to drive away around problems. Right, and I always, it's funny because once I started competition karting, I went indoor karting less, and now when I go back to my local indoor kart tracks, I remember what it was like to be one of the quick guys, and now I'm one of the guys in the middle, and you're like, oh man,
yeah. Well, and wait there, Davin. All those karts are not equal. Because I know, because I go there and, somebody beats me. I mean, they must have a faster kart, right?
Right.
Right.
Well, that is definitely one of the challenges that many of the indoor tracks have, is that, they're sharing the vehicles between people that just, that don't care, and they get abused and damaged. Mm-hmm. And there's people like us who care a little more. And the kind of damage that we do is different. I don't want to say
yeah, I was wondering where
we're at least tactical about it, But that's true. I worked in rentals years ago and ran a couple of rental tracks too, and the abuse that the karts get is just incredible. But there are some tracks out there, and I think probably with the advent of electric karts, we'll see more of this, where we'll see there's a bit more parity in them. But for sure, sometimes you can get in the kart and indoors, and literally there's no caster on the left side, and it
doesn't turn.
It will not turn unless you get up in the seat and sit over the right rear wheel and lock the wheels on the way in, and you'll get around the turn. But of course, you've lost 5 seconds on a 19-second lap, so that's not very effective.
But I think that's part of it too, though, is that what I love about an indoor karting place is when you go there and let's say you're going to go out and do 4 races or stints or something like that, and you get 4 different karts. Every single one of them is a little different, and you go, oh, okay, I need to adapt to this. I need to adapt to that. And I think that's the value of it.
Yeah, that's true.
What I did when I raced indoor karting more frequently is I had a logbook that I would write down all the karts that I drove, and I'd write down like, okay, so 14 doesn't turn left as well as it turns right, or 15's got a weird understeer on the very beginning of the corner, but if I give it a lot of yank, it'll really turn. And so it taught me how to be more attentive in identifying a problem, where I was like, A, this is a karting problem, versus B, this is a driving problem. Like, I'm not driving around this problem, or I'm driving incorrectly versus the kart not doing what I want. And then also, it got me more adaptable. So you could just throw me in a go-kart and be like, okay, go. And I knew kind of when I was there or thereabouts, I could make it work. And I knew that the other guys were adapting with other problems too. So nobody had a perfect kart. And so it kind of made it a little more fair.
So Davin, when I hear you talk, the word addiction keeps popping into my brain.
Well, okay, so I don't know if addiction's the right word or compulsive is the right word, right? Because like I get, it's not so much competitive, but I get driven to want to improve because I know that there's no upper limit to what you can do. And so you do a lap that you say, this is clearly as fast as the cart will go, and then somebody will jump in and do something 0.2 faster, and now we're back at it again.
Yeah.
Right? And that's always kind of what's drawn me to driving and racing, is always that. And even when I'll go to races where I know that the odds are stacked against me and I'm going to finish 12th or I'm going to finish 15th, it's almost more exciting than I know I'm going to finish there because I know there's so much more I can do. If I was winning every race, it wouldn't be fun to go. I mean, it would be fun to get the trophies and stuff, but then it would just fill up my, cabinet and I would get bored. So it's exciting to kind of talk and meet with other drivers to be like, how did you do that? What did you do? What do I need to do? Like, da-da-da-da-da-da. So we all kind of learn something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, the message here that is more car drivers. And, to be fair, most of the people listening to this podcast are car people. They do track days, they do HPD events, they do club racing. That's some autocrossers here, and for sure. And I think the message here is go karting, like go indoor karting, go get a whatever class of kart, and awesome. It's just a hugely valuable tool to help you fine tune. And I think I talk to a lot of drivers that do track day events, non-competitive track day events. And I think, I've heard from a number of them say, I love going to the indoor karting place because I get to compete. And, so it's a little bit different as well. Something for them to think about. And we could go on all night on this, but, I know you've got a happy birthday party to go to there, Davin. But actually, the one thing I do want to, one thing I want to ask you guys is, as I travel around and I go to different car clubs and do talks, one of the things I hear from a lot of the clubs, the big clubs, like the Audi, BMW, and Porsche clubs are the grain of our sport. Everybody in these club events, track day events and things they got gray hair, and there are fewer and fewer young people coming into the sport. And there's this big concern that, the sport is going to die just because young people have no interest in the sport. And I guess I'm wondering, what's your experience with karting? Do we have the same number of young people coming in? Do we see more at indoor karting places? What can these car clubs learn from karting, I guess, in that area?
So on the indoor kart scene, I think last year at least 10 new tracks popped up last year in the US that we'd added to our kart track directory. In terms of demographics and ages, I'm not 100% sure for kart racing. I guess by virtue of the kind of content and Davin and I's attitude, our biggest audience is 25 plus. I don't know if that's considered young or old, but that's that's the age. In the younger, obviously, you can start kart racing as young as 4, or karting. It doesn't have to be racing, but participating in some way, as young as 4. And longer term, I'd like to kind of change the narrative and the emphasis of youth kart racing again, where it's very much oriented towards becoming a pro driver. And for me, with my daughter, who hopefully this year going to spend more time on the track, it's more about just that experience of figuring out something together. And there's not a lot of sports that you can do that, not just figure things out together, but I can just go out, and I have just gone out on the track with her, and it's an incredible feeling. So I'd like to see a little bit more of that. Last year at PRI, I actually attended the Racetrack Business Conference, and that they had done some actual data research, and apparently the data actually bunks what we might think about some youth not being interested in automotive. It's just that their tastes are a little bit different. They're more into, I guess, show-oriented and event-oriented things. And I hate using terms like millennial and those, because I feel people are much more dynamic than that. But they had identified millennials as associating themselves and seeking events and experiences. So from that perspective, racing, auto racing in general, and auto sport, should we say, I think is actually poised to do quite well. And I think part of what Davin and I can probably bring to the table, because we're both kind of obviously very nerdy and data kind of driven, is, a lot of the younger generations are used to figuring these things out by using data. So, you've got kids that race drones and all these different things. They're used to using technology. And so our thought is to kind of bridge those two together as well, to give them a path where it's not just about the driving and the experience per se, but that's not a bonus, is that you've got this kinetic feedback. So that those are my thoughts on it. What about you, Davin?
Well, I kind of springboard off that a little bit is what I normally see kind of in that transition from, let's say young to old or whatever you want to say, but in karting to cars, and it doesn't really matter the group, is I see a lot of young racers struggling to understand how they got all that equipment in the first place. So when they become older, and let's say they go into college and they're able to kind of use their own income to buy things, how do they continue racing and start racing? There's always that gap between, and if I'm being kind of frank, when our parents are helping us get whatever we need to succeed, which is what happens when you're young, to when you need to do it yourself as you're older. And if that education isn't really brought to the table about, this is how you run a budget, right? This is how you make the right income. This is how much this costs. This, it becomes difficult then to manifest the ability to go racing. I talk to a lot of people who say, I raced with my dad when we were 6, and then I turned 19, and then we just stopped. And I think it's probably because of the fact I didn't come from a racing family, and I came from more of a business family. Like, my parents are all consultants and stuff. They said, we don't really care if you go racing, but if you're going to go racing, you're going to need to figure out how to find money. And so, and then if you find the money, you're going to have to figure out how to manage it over the year, because we're not going to give you any. And you're going to have to figure out what you want to do and how you're going to want to be able to manifest that. So when I talk to a lot of my peers, you brought up earlier, Ross, race where you have the biggest budget. That's where I always advocate, find a class that's affordable, that you can be flexible in, right? Let's say if we're using karting, because that's kind of what we've been talking the whole time. If you've got a certain amount of money, maybe don't go buy a shifter right away. Maybe go buy a 206, because you can do 10 times as many 206 races versus a shifter kart race. And you can stay in the community long enough to make the networking so that you can find your way into a faster piece of machinery so that you stay racing. That's only the big gap I see, because a lot of my older colleagues that are racing are 40 plus, and they've made their money and they can now go do what they want to because they can afford it. But they've had to go through that learning process of figuring it all out and then start racing again. I think if younger kids were kind of given some of that education at a younger age and kind of learned to understand how these things came to be, they may shift their mentality of like, well, I want to keep racing, so I need to save my money, or I need to keep racing, I need to get a job, or I need to keep racing, I need to learn how to network with people who are racing so I can stay connected with them. And that might help to, add that longer runway.
So awesome stuff. I mean, I guess what I'm hearing is I don't think our sport is ever going to die. Well, at least not in our foreseeable future here. So, So I think it's just only going to grow, and I think the stuff that you guys are doing, building the community, that kind of stuff, it only helps. It makes it easier for people to get involved and stay involved. So what's the Kart Pulse? What are the links? How do you want people to get a hold of you? How do you want people to get involved with you guys?
You can check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/Kartpulse. We post all kinds of content there, sometimes funny, sometimes serious and helpful. Mostly funny, though, because that goes well. Our website, of course, is kartpulse.com. We've got a karting track directory on there, which sounds kind of counterintuitive in the modern age, because you would think, hey, we can use Google Maps. And yes, you can, but sadly, you'll miss 26% of the tracks that are in America right now. So we're working to address that. And, of course, we've got forums at forums.kartpulse.com. If you're interested in getting started at any level, sign up. Super easy with Facebook or Twitter, and we'll start a conversation and have some fun.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks for helping the sport in motorsport in general grow, and thanks for doing this, and thanks for being on the show, guys. Happy birthday, Davin. And
thank you.
Thanks to both of you, and keep having fun, would you? Here's this week's speed secret. Program your breathing. Mentally practice breathing. Do you think drivers ever hold their breath when driving on track? You bet, right? Do you? If you're like most drivers, you do. And where? In the fast corners, in the heavy braking zones, and when making a tough pass, all high-stressed areas of the track. And think about it. When you hold your breath, you tense up your body. When you tense up your body, you're taking in less information from the car and track. Information you need to sense the limits right at that instant. So, holding your breath is not a good thing. But it's human nature to do this in stressful situations, so you need to reprogram your brain to breathe. Practice breathing when driving on the street, Mentally practice it by visualizing yourself in stressful situations and use trigger words to remind yourself. Breathe. Doesn't that feel good? Talking to James and Davin reminded me once again of why we do what we do. To have fun. Oh, and learn, which is fun. Speaking of learning, I'm learning a lot about podcasting. I know for sure I haven't turned a great lap on the podcasting track yet, but I'm continuing to figure it out. Some of it anyway. If you have any feedback or suggestions, please let me know. You can email me at ross@speedsecrets.com. I could also use some help getting more listeners. Actually, it's been pleasantly surprising how many people do listen to each episode, but like driving, there's always more. I'd like to get even more people listening. Part of that is up to me to make each episode even better, but I could also use your help with sharing the podcast with friends. Okay, that's it for another week. I hope you listen in again next week. Until then, keep learning and having fun.